next I will go over really quick is going to be the Spanish schools. If the Italians refined fencing to an art, the Spanish took it twice as far. Right around this time, the idea of mathematics and geometry were, almost divine in their importance. They felt that geometry was really like a God-given mathematics. This science is really how the universe works. So, if you can base your sword work on geometry, you have to win. There's no other doubt. This isn't some fickle thing found on Earth. Like this comes down from heaven. This has got to be right. It was a strange time then. So they codified the entire game of fencing to numbers and angles and precise times, proportions, such that everything is governed that it's almost inevitable. If you do everything right, it is inevitable that you're going to win. There's simply no other way. And if you lose, it's because you did not adhere to the principles correctly. And it's got so focused on that one of the books I have up there, a gentleman by the name of Gerard Tavot, there's a certain divine proportion for the fencer. Like there's a certain size, your leg's supposed to be a certain size, the sword a certain size, your hands, everything had a certain proportion. And if you didn't match that, well, you were already inherently flawed. It's tough luck, I suppose, right? So, how they tried to control the fight. They use the same idea of the Italians of that threat, except they use it even more aggressively. Sword straight up on your opponent right away. What this does is immediately they have to do something about it. This is right in their face. They can't ignore it. And by that fact alone, they have to do something about this. They're already playing into your game. They're what's known as obedience. They must obey the fact that you have a sword up. They have to do something. And then as they start to adjust the fight, I'm going to do a very precise progression from where I was to a new position, which still forces them to react a certain way, and continues on until I reach basically almost a firing solution where there is no option for them to be hit. And there's no really risk to you because you've done everything correctly. Their sword's in the wrong place. You don't have the strength, the leverage, the time, the distance, anything. They have nothing in their favor. Does that make sense? So please, real quick. Now, Spanish has only really just recently become, I don't even say popular. It's just coming onto the market, so a lot of people aren't really familiar with it. And no one's really refined it to what it was back in the time. So, if you were taking this Italian style, what I would generally do is I would approach or start to make a little bit of sword contact. Now, they had ways to describe how much pressure, where the swords are lined up in this cross. Everything had a value. And as I start to begin, I already know how this fight's going to end. Like I've done this 1,000 times back at the school. So I'm going to start to apply pressure a certain way, such that I already produce a disadvantaged situation for him. He has to do something. So the most common thing that disengage in that time, I just go for the strike. Now, because of the way the orientation works, I'm still behind my sword, so there's not really a whole lot of option for him to do anything, especially in the time of those strikes. And then I step away. There were diagrams they used to help guide this footwork, and one of the Silver actually discussed the Spanish styles. He said, well, of course they win. It takes them all their life just to learn how to do this particular style, such that after 20 years of experience, of course you're going to win. The mathematics are really what flavor the Spanish style, and that's really what gives it its strength, so to speak. But at the same time, it's inherent weakness, and that if you don't understand the mathematics, you can't do it correctly. And I don't know about anybody else here, but I don't really have the 8 hours a day that it takes to learn, the difference between little pressure. Like, for example, just a real quick tangent. Cour'd'Or real quick. So the way they describe pressure in blades, this was important. You had to be able to tell how much they were pushing your blade. What they would do is I would apply a certain amount of pressure, and then he would just disappear his sword so just disengage underneath. And there'd be a certain distance that my sword would move as I catch it, because I'm forcing into his weapon, and as soon as he disappears, you kind of catch yourself. And based on that arc, that's how you evaluate that pressure. And if I put a little bit more pressure, it'd be a bigger arc. Could you imagine doing that every day for like 8 hours? I mean, you would get real precise feeling for how much you're doing. And the idea is that then you can also read their weapon, because they're going to put pressure on you, and you know that if I disengage, I know where his sword's going to be when it's done, which means I know exactly where I have to be in order to counter him. Does that make sense? So it makes perfect mathematical sense. On paper, it sounds great. In practice, it's just very laborious and exhausting to go through all this process. Questions on that? Now, the gentleman I just spoke of was a Frenchman in Sweden practicing a Spanish style. So sometimes it gets easy to lose track of where particularly a lot of these styles come from. But I would recommend it all. Take a look at this book because it's definitely one of the most in-depth and detail-oriented, I think, of all the manuals. I can point that out a little bit later. Thank you.